Hey there, welcome back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. My name is Jay Frost, and if you're new to this party, welcome aboard. And if you're an old hand at this thing, it's great to have you back. We have a really special guest today, Jen Newmeyer, who I'm going to introduce to you in a moment. It's really exciting to have her here, but it's also great to have you. And I hope we'll hear from you in the chat right now to know that you're here. We should have a good sized crowd, but we'd love to know that it's you. So if you would, as of course, courtesy to our guest and just to talk with one another, let us know that you're here. Maybe tell us where you're from or which organization you're with, anything you'd like to include, put that right down in the chat if you would. We also have, as you saw on those slides that led up to the opening today, Q&A. You know what that means. We want you to use that to put those questions in. So please do throughout. We really do want to hear from you. And that's a good repository for the questions in case we miss them in the chat. So the chat's really the sandbox for you. The Q&A is for our guest. And with that, I'll introduce her. But first, I want to say that you won't be hearing much about DonorSearch today, a sponsor of this series back since 2016, over 500 programs, not because we don't care about them, we love them. And if it weren't for them, we couldn't talk with people like our guest today, but rather because this is a non-commercial series with guests like today's guest, the top people in the field of fundraising and philanthropy. And they have provided this platform, again, going back 500 programs, and a lot of those programs recorded and available to you over at their website at DonorSearch.net. You can find them under the resources tab, or you can find them on their YouTube channel. And while you're there, I hope you'll take a look at what they can tell you about your donors, because if it weren't for your donors, well, you couldn't do the work you do, and they can help you with that. But with that, I want to jump into, of course, the topic today and our guest, Jen Newmeyer. It's so great to have you here, Jen. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here.
Let me give you a brief introduction. Of course, the topic, in case you just stumbled into this, you'll be very happy you're here. Do stick around. And that's why we still miss the mark with digital fundraising. This conversation, and she'll be leading much of it, actually, she has a lot to share, is with a person who really knows this field well. You may know her as Charity Jen. If you don't know that website, I hope you'll check it out. Of course, in terms of her background, she's a CFRE, as you probably know already. She's a digital fundraising specialist specializing in integrated campaigns and online engagement. She's been working with nonprofits for over 20 years and is a national speaker, trainer, board member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals DC chapter, I think the largest in the country, if I'm not mistaken. And she's the author of The Insider's Guide to Online Fundraising, Finding Success When Surrounded by Skeptics. We'll make sure to include a link to that book in the show notes in the recording later. And she's also director of digital fundraising strategy at PBS. So if you don't know what those stand for, well, shame on you. But you'll know more about that, I'm sure, by the end of today's presentation. She's at the top of her game and has a lot to share with us. She also has just launched a new podcast. I hope you'll add it to those you listen to. And that's From the Nest with Charity Jen, where fundraising takes flight. And you can learn more and sign up for monthly newsletters at, of course, charityjen.com. I also want to give two other shout outs for those who like life in the real world, which is that she's going to be speaking both at the Bridge Conference, a really big conference in the DC area that's coming up. She's going to be doing kind of as a celebrity guest on the Major Donor Match Game at Bridge. And then in October, that's next week. And then in October, she's going to be here working with the AFP DC chapter, doing an educational session on Calm and Chaos, Advocate for Resources with a Winning Strategy, something which all of us need to know how to do. And so with that long-winded introduction, it's great to finally turn the baton over to you, Jen, and maybe just start with a question, which is, why are we still missing the mark with digital?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jay, and appreciate all of those shout outs. I'm again delighted to be here. Happy to chat with all of you today about my favorite topic, digital fundraising and online engagement. So to answer your question, Jay, there really, during this time that we have today, I really want to touch on three areas that were really sort of coming up, the more that I work with organizations, these three things seem to come up all of the time. So we'll dig into those, and we'll start with the very first one that I think that there is really a misunderstanding of how digital fundraising fits within the larger development strategy. So you have your development department, you have your major giving department, maybe you have a corporate giving department and an annual giving department, and then you want to start digital fundraising, and it's sort of like, okay, well, how does this work? Is this a marketing? Is this social media? How does this all fit? When I first started at PBS, which is the public broadcasting service, for those who don't know, based here in Crystal City, in Arlington, outside of DC. Um, as I was talking to stations, this topic came up all the time. How do I structure my department? And so what I started doing was relating a model that I think is very common within the fundraising profession. This is one of the core models that's a part of the CFRE credential when you're studying for that, and that's the giving pyramid. So when you're looking at the giving pyramid, you have your annual giving at the very bottom, then that moves up. Every organization may be a little bit different, but traditionally you have, your one-time givers, your recurring givers, you move up to mid-level giving, major giving, into planned giving. Some organizations might have corporate or foundation. And so within the giving model, digital fundraising fits in two ways. The first way is that digital fundraising supports all of those levels going up the giving pyramid. So your major giving department may be utilizing email to stay in touch with their major donors. You may have within your corporate department, you might be using digital tools as part of the sponsorship packet. So if they are underwriting a campaign or providing a match challenge, you're utilizing digital tools and ads and putting together a package that recognizes them in that way. So there's that aspect of digital fundraising, using those tools to support all levels of the development department. But then there's also digital fundraising where you're intentionally creating campaigns at that sort of base level, that annual giving level, to acquire more donors to feed into that pipeline of the giving pyramid. So you're putting together, Giving Tuesday is a very common, campaign that I think that we're all, pretty familiar with. Your year-end campaigns, you're putting these campaigns together with a lot of digital fundraising tools and intentionally acquiring, engaging, converting these folks into donors for the organization. So it takes a lot of coordination, but so that's sort of the out strategy is what I call it at the bottom of that giving pyramid. So I think that's why when you're putting together the structure for a department, it can be a little, sort of you're thinking of all of these different tools that you're using for the, regular, your development efforts, but then also sort of creating these campaigns. And that's really what your digital fundraising person or department should be focused on. It's sort of pulling that all together.
Perfect.
So yeah, so that is, and then, I think that, having that kind of understanding can really help craft the job descriptions for your digital fundraisers, for the kinds of things that they'll need to be doing and the kind of support that they need to provide to the team. So that's the first thing. Does that kind of resonate with some of what you have heard or experienced in digital fundraising?
Absolutely. And I'm going to look over here also in the chat and Q&A in case somebody says something. If it does resonate with you, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have questions about how to operationalize some of these things that Jen is going to be sharing today, I hope you'll also make comments about that. We would love to hear that. I loved how you talked about intentionally creating campaigns for acquisition, because it seems like many people, and I'm sure you'll dive more into this, sometimes we have arguments about what is the ROI on on social in particular. So with email, you can probably read the numbers, but with social, maybe it's a little more difficult, and that's a constantly changing environment. So I'd love to hear more about that, either in later sections or even now, about how you're intentionally creating campaigns specifically with mind for acquisition and maybe even then retention, which seems to be the big challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and I think that that's sort of the eternal marketing struggle, isn't it? Like, how do we show the ROI on some of these efforts? But I think that this leads into the type of strategy that you're using when you're putting together these campaigns. So I always talk about utilizing the growth funnel, for example. So when you're putting together a campaign that incorporates acquisition, engagement, and conversion, and moving into then stewardship, what are those benchmarks that you're looking for to really understand the impact of those efforts? So when, to your point, when you're specifically looking at acquisition and those efforts on social, when you're putting together, a campaign and focused on acquisition, you're focusing on ads, for example.
Mm.
And so, or website pop-ups, or banner ads, or these kinds of efforts that draw in these external audiences. So there are different ways that you can sort of benchmark yourself to establish those ROI, those points of the metrics for the success of how these things are performing. So for example, on your digital ads, looking at the impressions, the click-throughs. With a lot of the paid ads, you'll have a little bit more control on looking at the metrics of the performance of those. I think that you're right with the general social media posts, the stories. If you have TikTok, those TikTok videos that you're posting. I would say that if you're looking for ROI on those organic efforts, really the best way to go about it is sort of, testing and utilizing them in different campaigns at different times. So if we're doing a giving day, and we're not uh, we're not posting a lot of stories on Instagram or on TikTok or on some of these other platforms, but we're rolling out our standard campaign tactics. How does that affect the performance downstream, the revenue? There are a lot of really great experiments that are done by the Next After Online Fundraising Institute.
Yeah.
And I am actually working with them right now on a pilot program with a number of stations across the country for an online fundraising audit, where there's sort of a mystery donor experience. They come to your website, try to sign up for your newsletter, try to sign up for your, try to make a donation, and what does that user journey look like? As you know, they are, and for folks in the audience who don't know, nextafter.com is where you can go for that research library. They have over 5,000 experiments on all of these different sort of, online journeys. But they have an experiment that shows where they were able to split the audience for a year-end campaign. And this organization had a series of 4 or 5 emails and touch points with the audiences that they were planning on soliciting for the end of year, that didn't have an ask in them, that just talked about the impact of support, what the organization was contributing to the community, really mission focused. And what they found was that the group that had received those 5 articles, when it came time to ask for a donation, I don't know what the percentage is. It was a crazy increase in revenue by what they call those priming articles. So I do think that anecdotally there are there's lots of research out there that shows that those organic touch points, and of course, within the CFRE, fundraising professionals know the 6 or 7 touch points that you should have with your audience before you ask them for another donation. Um, but that does show, impact in revenue and increases in retention and if you're a membership organization, renewal.
Thank you for that. And also, we did have a note from the audience asking about the name of that website again. And that is nextafter.com, I believe it is.
Mhm.
And I didn't put in the www before because I didn't think we needed to do that anymore. But anyway, it's not hyperlinked because I didn't do it. But you can
Oh,
easily type that in and find them there. Those experiments are massive. And what you just described is so far beyond kind of even the A/B testing that we're all accustomed to. But with that evidence, it must be much easier to either the evidence provided by other organizations or the ones that we do inspired by that data to then get other people to work with us. Because I have no idea what it must be like in PBS world, but in a lot of organizations, you have almost still this silo: marketing, fundraising, different entities, and they don't always effectively collaborate. I mean, is that a fair judgment?
that is correct, Jay. And that actually leads into my second point. So that is a perfect segue into the second item that I was going to talk about why digital fundraising, why we're missing the mark, and that is collaboration. So there are a couple of different areas here that we can talk about. To your point of having that research and that external knowledge available to the fundraisers who are in the organization that are trying to put together these campaigns and trying to advocate for those that budget for ads, for example, or improving the technology or doing the experimentation. Yes, having that research at hand can be very helpful in convincing leadership or getting leadership on board with a lot of these efforts that can for a lot of leaders who don't understand digital or online engagement can seem just not very effective or not a good use of time. I remember years ago when I started these efforts at the Services organization that I worked with in North Carolina. I launched all of the social media platforms for the organization, and we did a website redesign and started sending emails, put together a social media ambassadors program. A lot of these stories are in my book. But I remember our CEO, it was a food bank that I was working at. And of course, I'm in the warehouse taking pictures, posting to social media and to Twitter. He would pass me and say, "Oh, are you tweeting again, Jen?" like, like it was kind of like sort of,
Right.
extra superfluous thing that I was doing, walking through the warehouse, just, doing my social media engagement. But hopefully we're a little bit more, advanced in helping leaders, understand the importance of digital and these kinds of things. But back to collaboration. So this also has a lot to do with putting together the structure within an organization. Where does the digital fundraising team live? Are they in development? Are they in marketing? Are they in communications? Are they in some organizations have a digital department? And each organization probably is going to have a little bit of a different structure. There's no one structure that fits all. But I will say the important thing to understand is that the digital fundraiser and the digital fundraising efforts touch so many different areas within within an organization. Now, for a very small organization, it can be one person who is, managing the website, doing the social media, putting together the emails, working on all of these different things. But it can also be like when I started at WHYY in Philadelphia, working with up to 7 or 8 different departments to launch a digital fundraising effort. We're talking about marketing, we're talking about communications. You have digital technology team that does the website. There's another technology team that handles the CMS, the database of record, and all of the reporting and all of the setup and the codes and structure with that. You might have another team that handles the e-commerce platform, sending, all the automations, maybe even somebody else who does texting, your text campaigns. When I was at WHYY, there was a team that did, video production, pre-roll spots, on-air spots. Then, of course, you have your finance department because you need your reporting and your budgets, and then maybe even working with a corporate team for matching challenges and sponsorships. And so the digital fundraiser sort of pulls all of these teams together to put together various campaigns and to bring together the strategy. And so I think that that can also be hard for the organization to even understand. I think, if you have leadership that says, yes, here's our digital fundraiser, and they're going to be working with all of these different teams, like that is the effective strategy for digital fundraising. It's a lot easier than coming in where leadership doesn't understand that. And it's up to the digital fundraiser, AKA me, to say, hey, I'm the digital fundraiser and I need your help with X, X, and X, and to 7 different departments and 7, so. But it can also, there also is a little bit of tension as well with, say, a team that's already established. So this is very common with social media, for example. You might come into an organization or start a digital fundraising, strategy where you already have a social media team, you already have a marketing team who may be working on emails. So trying to collaborate with them on, okay, when can I fit in my, my promotion for my year-end campaign? What can we do for Giving Tuesday strategy, within emails? Really trying to explore what is already set up, and then trying to plug in, some of those different efforts. So with large organizations already established, it's not easy, but it is possible. And I don't want people to get discouraged. But that's where the collaboration is just so essential.
One thing really sticks out for me, which is getting a person with authority to address the issue, because there will be people of varying levels of understanding about what you're trying to do, but also they all feel busy. And you're asking them effectively to do something new, put something else in their schedule. You know that it's going to be useful for them, but they have these other pressures. They have this other accountability. So the only way that changes really is having somebody with the vision and who's willing to, exhibit that authority to the office, to lead by example. And I wonder if that's true irrespective of the size of the office. If that's a team like you just described at WHYY, where you have a lot of different parties, but sounds like they have a lot of professional experience. So it's a matter of coordinating all that. But it's also maybe in a small office where you still need somebody who's going to say, this is the direction we're taking, and we need you to work together.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And that, again, leads into my third point. So again, great segue. But yes, strong leadership, 100%. So in organizations where I was very effective, there was, even though I was at the food bank and the CEO didn't really understand what I was doing, he supported it, and we saw impact from it. We started running campaigns and, started raising revenue. And luckily, he was patient and flexible and, said, Jen, just go and do what you do. Trust, and there was trust there in what I was responsible for to be able to make that effective. In organizations where you may not have that, yes, it can be a small organization where that strong leadership is still essential. You might have board members who are saying, "This is what we need to be doing." I clearly remember board members pushing for us to really do a big marketing campaign around Amazon Smiles when it was, Amazon, Amazon Day, the big,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like, okay, let me explain now I don't want to, there were a lot of organizations who did, find Amazon Smiles to be, very helpful to their revenue streams. But for the most part, there are other campaigns that are much more lucrative and have a much higher ROI. So I literally had to put together an entire, almost a mini research paper on here's the ROI from Amazon Smiles. Here's the ROI if we were to do, put that investment into another campaign. So even in a small organization, leadership can have that external pressure from board members or others. So you are absolutely right. Strong leadership and support for these efforts is critical.
Yeah, there must be all sorts of pressures on everybody, and often we don't recognize what they are, whether it's the public on the CEO or the CEO on the CFO or the CFO on somebody else, and it's coming from all directions too. It's not always just from the top, whatever that is. And satisfying those must be difficult, especially when just because a person has a position of authority, they don't necessarily have depth of knowledge on each of these disciplines. This is the thing about digital. If you went in and talked to TikTok, I don't want to take you off track, but if you went and talked to somebody about TikTok in a shop, and it was a pretty big place, if the organization's 10, 20, 30 million dollars, the CEO may or may not be familiar with TikTok. Is that a fair
Yeah,
assumption?
yeah, absolutely. There's almost an education that comes along with it,
Right.
with these kinds of with digital fundraising in particular, because I mean, if you think about philanthropy in general, the strategies that we have developed over so many years
Mhm.
for major giving, for direct mail, for telemarketing, like we have we have so many metrics that we have honed in on the most effective ways for the most part to, I mean, there are like libraries full of books on on these topics where digital fundraising is still relatively new because there are so many different ways to approach it. And so coming in, there is a little bit of an education that has to happen. Yes, you have to talk about how TikTok, if you decide to go with TikTok, I'm not advocating one way or the other, but if you decide that that is an area you want to explore, yes, education, probably having, some resources to sort of back up the impact that other organizations have seen. Um, Alternatively, if again you have that trust in your leaders from your leadership to say, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I would love to experiment with it because we will learn something. Whether we fail or succeed, that is going to inform our future strategy. So, and that is a part of having that strong leadership that is there to support experimentation, and that within this, within this topic, A/B testing, experimentation, there needs to be that flexibility because even within organizations, sector wide, different approaches to connecting with audiences online, um, different things are going to be different for for different organizations. associations are probably going to be very successful on LinkedIn, whereas, animal shelters are probably going to do great on Instagram. Do you know, like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of different approaches that can be taken sector-wide, organization-wide, geographically even, Midwest is going to perform differently than, New York City,
Right. Right. Or the Far East for that matter. I mean, it's,
Mhm.
because the platforms are global.
Yeah.
This is also a great segue to a question from the audience. Do you mind if
Yeah.
I share a couple of those with you?
Sure. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and that has to do with tools. Yeah, I
Mhm.
bet you're surprised people are asking about tools. Um, so, because we all want to know. So we were asked, how do you determine which tool to use? Is there a benefit to sticking with just social media versus, or maybe even a particular social media tool, versus mixing it up with email, snail mail, et cetera?
Yeah, for sure. So this is another question that comes up a lot as I'm working with stations across the country, because they're PBS stations, they're small stations, there are large stations, and so everyone has a little bit of a different need.
Mhm.
What I have developed for them is a sort of a fundamental, an intermediate, and an advanced approach as a guide to follow.
Mhm.
If you are a small organization, and you don't have a lot of resources, my recommendation is to really focus your campaigns on email, social media, and website. Make sure that user journey is 100% smooth and efficient. Like that, you send out an email. What does the user journey look like when they, get to the website, get to your donation form? What does thank you? What is in your autoresponder? What are your thank you letters? Like really focusing on that basic donor journey. Same for e-newsletter sign up, and the same for any social media efforts that you're doing. If you're diving into ads, if you're promoting a newsletter, are they getting directed to a newsletter page that's asking them to sign up for 10 other newsletters? Like just really evaluating that that journey on those within those areas. So website, social media, email. Focus on the journey, and donation form, of course. Then the second stage would be looking at segmentation, segmenting your audiences, um, making those emails even more impactful by personalizing them, utilizing conditional content, and then really honing in on ad strategies. So your Google ad grant, if you have it, or any type of, right now, not only with Google Ads, but Microsoft has just launched several months ago ad grants for nonprofits. I don't in the public media space. I don't know that a lot of stations are taking advantage of it, but I think others are. But that maybe is a great opportunity to focus on. So the intermediate stage, really honing in on ads, segmentation. Then at the advanced stage, like that's when you really can do more A/B testing, focus on texting, expanding your social media platforms if you're ready to do that. Some of the other sort of newer, shiny things. But I absolutely 100% advocate for that basic user journey. I have a whole on my website. I have something called the housekeeping challenge, because there was an article that came out in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. I saw maybe a lot of people saw it, that talked about the decline in donors, household donors over the past 2 decades, and we have half of the donors now than we had 20 years ago. Like that is a real problem. Now, there are many things that can go into it, but what I have noticed in working with nonprofit organizations is those basic user journeys, those donation forms, they're not perfect. They're not um, they're not mobile friendly. For
Mhm.
example, there's a lot of friction. There are a lot of decisions that the donor has to make. It's not easy. There are universities. This was one. topic for a webinar I had a few months ago about friction when you're making that donation. Universities make it very difficult to give money to to a university. I won't mention the name. I'll refrain from doing that. But I went to a university to make a donation. There were at least 15 steps for me to make a donation. I had to determine the fund. I had to determine the fund within the fund. Then I had to log in and create an account. And it was crazy. So that would be my recommendation on tools. There are lots of great things to add to your sort of your tool belt for digital fundraising. But hopefully those three categories, and I'm working on my second book actually, and hopefully we'll be done with it by the end of the year. But I'm talking a lot about this, about taking the fundamental, the intermediate, and the advanced approach to digital fundraising and what you should be focusing on. Because it's true, you can go to a conference and have the shiny object syndrome, and leadership can do the same thing, and boards can do the same thing. But if you sort of develop your plan of these are the things that we need to focus on first and get in place first, and it's a little easier to navigate those conversations.
Do you have a general rule of thumb that you apply when there is a new bright, shiny object that may in fact be very useful or may not, that's more specific to whatever organization you happen to be in? And I'm asking this with reference to a question that came in from Beth, who had said, how do you feel about text or WhatsApp? And, text, you mentioned text already, so I don't think we need to interrogate that. It seems like SMS or text to give or some form of that is very common now. Most of us get it on our phone, whether we like it or not. WhatsApp seems a little different. It's sort of like our conversation about TikTok or one we could have about Threads. So what do you have kind of general benchmarks that you apply when you talk to others, especially PBS stations, and say, here are some ways to think about something that might be on the horizon to see whether it's really right or not for you?
Yeah, I would. The first question that I would sort of ask is, what is the health of your overall program? Are you ready to pull in something else to add to your strategy? And if you are, that's great. So if you're thinking about a texting effort, so I would, number one, I would say research. Research what other organizations have found successful. Number two, experiment. I think that experimentation is, that is the way that you're going to determine whether these tools are right for you. And within experimentation, that is also evaluating, can we absorb the expense of whatever this is? So if you're thinking about, a text to give campaign or a text to give program, you're going to need a texting vendor. What does the budget look like to absorb something like that? Understanding that we could be wildly successful, we could not. So are we ready to to absorb that? Are we ready to experiment with that? And then again, going back to that user journey, how does texting fit into the overall communication plan that we have with our donors during these campaigns? What is the strategy for incorporating this into our various elements? And then also making sure that there is attribution. Source code attribution can be a really big problem. So before you dive into texting, let's have a conversation about how we can apply the source code so that we can really understand how many donations, what are sort of the metrics that we're looking at for that. Right.
No, that makes perfect sense. You said something else too, and I want to encourage people, if you have other questions, please ask them. I'm trying to monitor both the chat and the Q&A, and these are great questions, which is why I keep posing them to Jen. And you may have others. One of the ones that occurred to me is this issue about the decline in donors. This is something we've talked about a lot here on the Mastermind series from a number of different perspectives. We've seen, for those who are new to this subject, you just introduced it. We've looked at a decline from around 66% of the population giving 2 decades ago, maybe as high as 75% when I started in the field, because I'm old, to now 49.6%, according to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project in the last polling. And it seems like it's in further decline now. Plus, we've seen a decline in inflation-adjusted dollars this last year from the Giving Institute. But one of the questions everybody asks is about how to keep people there. So you just described the donor journey. I guess kind of keeping it simple, making sure you don't have to take 13 steps, like you said,
Yeah.
to make a donation. But then once they're in there, let's assume that we've done that part right.
Yes.
And people need to read more of your work to make sure we're doing that. But once we've done that right, how do we make sure that we're still showing them love so they stay there? Because it seems like that's where we lose. If we're losing, it's not 1 out of 2 now. It is 1 out of 2 donors we're losing or more. I think the retention rate is something like 19% for most organizations. So what can we do, especially in the digital front, so people don't feel like ATM machines?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my another one of my passionate topics to talk about is engagement. And this goes back to, again, some of those basic fundraising principles that we all know. What are the 6 or 7 touch points that we're having with our donors throughout the year? Are we really focusing in on 100% stewardship with them? And for digital donors in particular, what are some of the engagement strategies that we're using to keep them interested? So I talk a lot with stations about the various kinds of digital campaigns. So yes, you have your revenue campaigns. We're all familiar with them. There are stewardship campaigns. There are engagement campaigns. There are acquisition campaigns. The purpose of an engagement campaign is to ensure that you're keeping your organization at the forefront of the donor's mind. That doesn't always mean asking them to, make a contribution or upgrade or renew. I'm talking about simple things, trivia, polls, surveys, getting their feedback, asking them questions. I am really impressed with the African American History Museum here in DC. I joined their program and I got a letter in the mail that was just like a certificate of appreciation about 6 months after I had given, and I was like, this is wonderful, we need to let our donors know that, again, back to those basic principles, how their gift is impacting our organization. So does that mean every quarter our CEO records a video that says, let me tell you about what we've done over the past 3 months and how your donation has made a difference, letting them know about big things that are coming, big programs that you have. When I was at WHYY, they have an incredible education team. I mean, it is just the education team that they have created is sort of a pipeline for journalists and creators and video creators. And they go into high schools and these kids are learning all of these amazing things. It is the most amazing program that nobody talks about. And I wasn't at WHYY for long enough to really implement the spotlight on that. But within your organizations, ask, what are some of these sort of, programs these little known programs that we're doing that just are really making a big impact, and how can we continually communicate them? I think that's another aspect. I think that social media managers understand this because they're in the business of talking about the organization and talking about the mission. How can that be sort of ported over into donor stewardship and, really engaging the audiences and not just another revenue campaign, not just another Giving Tuesday ask?
Right, absolutely. And by the way, we had Janet, who had to leave the room, but she said she so appreciates all the support resources you've gotten for us and your time today. And she has a donor meeting, so that's a good reason.
Yes.
But she said thank you to you, Jen. So we appreciate you, Janet. And I also, on this same theme about donor retention, you've kind of, again, taken us through, and I have to reassemble, so I make sure I remember that donor journey and then the next, components of making sure that we have those touch points so that people know that we actually care about them.
Yes.
We really do. That certificate of appreciation, before we go away from that, how did that make you feel?
I was and there was no ask in it. It was just, we so appreciate your support. Here's what we have been doing this year. Here are the programs that are coming up if you want to join us. But it was just to be honest, I don't think I'll ever forget it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
I mean, this is,
really,
and how
really
much
well
time did
done.
it really take them to do that?
Right, exactly, exactly. So I'm sure that they're I honestly want to call their development department and ask who they're using for their direct mail program, because I just want to give them kudos, because
Right.
that's what your direct mail firm would be probably responsible for sending those out to donor. Maybe not. Maybe it would be sort of an internal where you use volunteers to send those out. But it was so heartwarming. It was
Well, and
wonderful.
the leader, I mean, even if they have the best, outsourced firm in the world, the leader had to say, yes, that's what we want to do, or even inspire the message that this is important to the people who care about this museum.
Yeah.
So one way or the other, the leader was involved in that, and obviously it works for the place. So
Hmm.
now, one of the things that people are trying to address as they think about donor retention is, what tools do we use? And one part is, you mentioned segmentation. And
Hmm.
so maybe research is a component of that. And then on the flip side, although this is harder to address because there's so many tools now and we don't really know what's underneath many of them, is AI. So do you have thoughts on how you've seen shops using research to do more effective segmentation, and also where AI might fit in the mix, both for acquisition but also retention when it comes to—
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say I'm very knowledgeable on the segmentation aspect of it, but how that fits into AI, we've been exploring. Well, first let me go to segmentation.
Sure.
So segmentation in a couple of different ways. There are some very easy segments that all donor databases have. Whether you're a donor, whether you have a donor or not a donor, whether they're giving amounts, geographically where they live, like those are segments that can be used not only in conditionalizing your emails,
Mhm.
so sending an email to everyone maybe in a certain town or a certain county talking about your program and the difference it's made or whatever, but
Mhm.
also that segmentation can be used for ads. So
Oh, sure.
those lists can be imported, and you can do some very powerful segmented ads. The taking that a step further, though, is having a database that allows for tagging and interest tagging. So, and being very intentional about that kind of tagging. So, if your organization is, say, in a shelter, is are your donors interested in cats or dogs or rabbits, or
Yeah.
and asking
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
questions and surveys and tagging them, and then sort of putting them into a funnel that more aligns with their interests.
Mhm.
So that's getting a little bit more advanced in the segmentation topic, but very effective if you can really relate to your audiences and what they're interested in. um, as far as utilizing AI, so we have explored a couple of things here at PBS. One of the things is, for example, you can load in. Well, for here, we've been loading in captions from programs and asking ChatGPT to come up with like trivia questions or
Sure.
subject matter topics. But you can do this with letters. I read an article about an organization who loaded in letters that their CEO had been writing and then asked ChatGPT to put together a newsletter introduction based using their voice with like these 5 topics or something like that. Like a really easy way to, help, generate some of that content.
Mhm.
But as far as how AI sort of fits into segmentation, I think I personally would be doing more research on that. And maybe there are even some people who are in the audience right now who are the masterminds of this and could be your next guest, Jay.
We're always open to that. So if you have an idea for a program or a guest, please let us know.
Yeah.
And we're having a note from Shannon who says that I used ChatGPT not too long ago to give me the basis for an in-kind donation request. And then let me see. Oh, and we have a note from Madison just saying, I was lucky enough to meet Jen a couple of weeks ago at a conference. You can learn so much from listening to her, which we're doing today. So yes, valuable points, lots of great insight, always leaves me inspired. Yes, you're definitely doing that today. I guess as we're trying to assemble all that you've been sharing with us and thinking about all this, and recognizing also that if we'd had this conversation 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, it might have been a little different, right? I mean,
Yeah.
things have evolved. Where are you seeing things going? I mean, putting aside the tools for a second, because as you said, AI, it's hard to say, but just as a field, are we getting smarter about this? Are we doing the things we need to do? Where do you see us needing to go, especially to address this need we have for resources, but in an intentional way that really leans in on relationships, but uses digital to build that
Mhm.
bridge?
Yeah. So I think that in many ways, we're poised for success from a digital engagement and online um, uh, donation standpoint. I'll reference HJC just published a digital outlook report for 2023. And I actually quoted their 2019 report for my book when I was writing it, because at the time, there were less than 60% of organizations who had someone in place focusing on digital strategy. Now, as of 2023, that is up to over 80%. So we're starting to recognize that these roles are important, and we actually need to, invest in not only the staffing, the resources for staff and skills, but also for technology.
Mm.
So that's a good thing. Um, I think that, simultaneously in that same report, they said that one of the biggest challenges was training and implementing their digital strategy. So 40% of organizations are still struggling with that. So I think that we're moving in the right direction. Um, and I think that there are a lot of very, very smart marketers out there that really have a good handle on, digital marketing tactics, advertising. I think that we're in a good place. One thing, though, that I do have concerns about is the tech stack for organizations. And by that I mean the CRMs, the e-commerce platforms. That are and the integrations that they
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
um, from a data standpoint, that's where I've seen sort of the biggest gap. There are a lot of really great, tools out there, CRMs, ECRMs, that are doing great things for organizations. There are a lot of organizations that can't afford those. So it is so for there was another article that I was just looking at last week about organizations coming out of the pandemic. Strong ones are doing great, but the quote in the article was that the weak are getting weaker. And so that is it. That is one of my biggest concerns, is that the smaller organizations are being left behind. So you know, um, how can we create the tools, resources, training that is going to help really bolster their efforts and make them and put them in a better place?
Well, I hope that people will have a chance to hear you talk more about that, because I'm sure you'll be addressing that in lots of different ways
Yeah.
over the next few months and in the new book. It's a perennial problem, but
Yes.
I suspect that you have hope, like I do, that sometimes small organizations can be nimble if they have good advice from people like you. So
Yeah.
thank you for all of this today, Jen. Really do appreciate it. I know we had a couple questions at the end from Jorge, so I'll go ahead and take the liberty of passing those to Jen afterwards. And if anybody else has a question or wants to reach out to you or just to say hello, and they can't find you at Bridge or at AFPDC, and go there if you can, how should they find you?
You can, well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Jen Newmeyer is where I can be found. Also, feel free to email me. My email address is jen@charityjen.com. And you can also, on my website, like I said before, I have lots of resources, downloads for you on the growth funnel, on getting started with digital fundraising, that housekeeping challenge that I was talking about, getting things in order. Lots of different things, and I'm 100% available. So please just let me know.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And I want to thank everybody else for hanging around with us today. Obviously, you got a lot out of this discussion with Jen. I can see comments like amazing coming up. So thank you for that. And thank you for showing the love. Also want to encourage you to join us in 2 weeks. I take a little hiatus here. And then you'll find me and this series back in mid-August with sessions live from London, where I'll have a whole bunch of interesting guests that I'm sure you're going to want to hear from. Those will be held at noon because it'll be 5 p.m. there. So be on the lookout for notifications from DonorSearch or on your favorite social media channels where you can learn about all that. I hope you'll join us for those live conversations. They should be very interesting. And then after that, we'll be going on to the APRA conference in Indiana, where they return after, I think, 30 years since they were last there. So please join us for all of that. All of that is live. You can find out about that and everything else, including a recording of this session today, which you'll want to listen to again because of everything Jen shared, at DonorSearch.net, which is also a great place to learn about your donors. So with that, thank you again to the wonderful Jen Newmeyer. Thanks to all of you, and we'll see you all next time. Till then, take care.